Good evening. On our panel this evening, we have from the UK Government, Chris Heaton-Harris, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. He was previously a member of the European Parliament before being elected to the Commons in 2010. After working in Boris Johnson's government, he was appointed to his current role a year ago. Hilary Benn is Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. In a long Westminster career, which began last century just, he served in the governments of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. John Finucane is from Sinn Féin, and his party's core objective is a united Ireland. He's one of 7 Sinn Féin MPs, although none takes their seat at Westminster. Last year, and for the first time, they became the largest single party in the Northern Ireland Stormont Assembly elections. Saoirse Eastwood is a member of the Centrist Alliance Party, the 3rd largest party here. Last year, she was elected to Stormont as a member for Lagan Valley. Her commitment to politics was there for all to see in 2017, when her wedding day coincided with the general election, and she voted in her wedding dress. And Sir Geoffrey Donaldson leads the Democratic Unionist Party, the dominant unionist and conservative force here for the last 20 years, and now 2nd largest party at Stormont. The DUP walked out of Northern Ireland's power-sharing agreement 20 months ago in opposition to how Brexit trade arrangements affect Northern Ireland. Talks continue, but devolution here remains suspended. Good evening. It's great to be back in Northern Ireland. Welcome to our panellists, to our audience, and of course, welcome to you at home. We're available as a podcast straight after the show. If you would like to listen to the programme, just go to BBC Sounds. And of course, there's always a debate, a lively debate on social media as well. Let's take our first question from Michael O'Gallagher.
In Northern Ireland, we've learnt that talking is the key to conflict resolution. How do we encourage talks in the Middle East?
Chris, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, we've got to do everything we can to encourage talks in the Middle East. And actually, the Prime Minister has gone out there, the President of the United States has gone out there, our Foreign Secretary has gone out there to do exactly that and spoken to, the Prime Minister has spoken to the PM and the President of Israel. But these are really troubled times. Israel was attacked by a terrorist organisation. And Hamas is a terrorist organisation. We should all be able to say that. Israel has the right to defend itself. And everything has to be done properly, you know, in a humanitarian way as possible. But
can you see any serious chance of talks? And if so, talks with whom?
Eventually, yes. Northern Ireland's history demonstrates that eventually you can have talks and you can bring people together, but it takes an awful long time. George Mitchell was here, the senator who brought together the talks for the Belfast Good Friday Agreement back in April, and it took him 2 years in a very different context to do that.
And how far off do you think we would be?
I've honestly got no idea. I'm not an expert in the Middle East, and I just look in horror at what started to happen on October the 7th. But I can't imagine what it's like.
Hilary?
I mean, watching the scenes we've seen, the slaughter of the Israelis on the 7th of October and the deaths in Gaza it is so shocking. And we feel desperate, we feel despair, because what can we do? But I think that the experience here in Northern Ireland at a very dark time should give us some encouragement. Because, you know, when I was growing up and watching the news, reading the newspapers about what was happening here, and if you'd said to me at that time, do you think it will ever end? I might have said, well, I sincerely hope so, but I'm not sure I will live to see it. But we did. And how did it happen? How does conflict come to an end in all cases? It's through political leadership. And what has been absent in Israel and on the part of the Palestinians has been that political leadership. Because in the end, the people who are experiencing the conflict, they're in the same boat. The first time I went to Gaza, I met people in Sderot, an Israeli town which was being shelled from over in Gaza. Then I went to Beit Hanun, the other side of the fence, and a woman showed me where a shell came through the roof and killed her 12-year-old son when he was sleeping. And both these mothers said to me, our children are so terrified, they wet the bed at night. they lived 4 miles apart. They absolutely have a common interest. And you need political leaders to take the difficult step, which is not to say, I am the victim, you are oppressing me. You can carry on doing that forever, but to say, we need to put our weapons aside, sit down together and find a way of living alongside each other, as happened here in that extraordinary moment 25 years ago.
So are you saying, Hilary, then, that the current Israeli government is not the government to do that?
Well, the current Israeli government says, with absolute justice, there is no partner for peace on the part of Hamas, because Hamas is dedicated to the destruction of Israel. Yeah. And they are. And I agree with Chris when he says it was a terrorist attack that we saw. I mean, they claim we are protecting the Al-Aqsa Mosque. How does murdering babies in their beds advance the cause of the Palestinians?
But you're talking about political...
It is not.
Just briefly, because I need to get around the rest of the
Yeah.
panel, but you're talking about political leadership and a lack of political leadership. I assume you're including the Israeli government in that, from what you're saying.
In the end, on the part of Israel and the Palestinians, but the first step has to be, as you know from the experience in Northern Ireland, those who are seeking to change things and destroy one state by violence, namely Hamas, have to put their weapons down, abandon their wish to destroy the state of Israel, and say, we need to talk. And until that happens, who can the Israelis talk to?
Yeah.
Okay. Woman here in the blue.
I just wanted to pick up, and it might be a small point relative to the discussion, but it's just something Chris said, that we should be free to say that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. I think within conflict resolution, we have to be brave, and we have to not be worried about the consequences of standing up and saying something that we believe in, without fear of retribution or retaliation from other people.
Okay, thank you for your point. Yes, the woman there with the plait.
First of all, the ANC was a terrorist organisation and Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. And then you can say Yasser Arafat and the PLO, they were terrorists. Mr Heaton-Harris, this didn't start on the 7th of October. Do the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? Because the speak is, Israel has a right to defend itself. Did Palestine have a right to defend itself when land was taken from it, when people were dispossessed, when houses were levelled, when UN resolutions on torture, on ethnic cleansing, on apartheid? Did the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? Did they have a right to defend themselves when Israel turn on and turn off the electricity and stop food and stop medical aid long, long before this attack?
Well, let's let him answer, shall we?
Just one more thing, right? There are 600 Palestinian children buried under the rubble at this moment in time. There are over 500 Palestinian children dead, and there are 500 Palestinian children in jail, 150 of them minors. Hostages, hostages. The children under the rubble are hostages. The children in the jails are hostages. Okay. There are hostages on both sides here.
What we can't be sure about, sadly, is exactly how many people have been killed, actually, because we know it's a lot, but we just can't know how many. Do you want to just quickly answer that?
Yeah, and I understand the passion that the lady has talked. But on October the 7th, a terrorist attack of a music festival for a kibbutz changed the nature of the relationship between Israel and the Palestinian, Hamas most certainly, and Palestine.
Let him answer. Give him a chance to answer.
And Israel has absolutely got the right to look after itself. Yesterday I spoke to, there's a very small Jewish community here in Northern Ireland and a slightly larger Muslim community. I spoke to the leaders of both communities. And what they both wanted is what I believe everybody will want in this audience, is peace. But it's a long road to peace, and you don't get anywhere along that road when you're attacking and killing people at music festivals and flying in and kidnapping people. It's just not right.
John, so Michael's question is, in Northern Ireland, we've learned that talking is key to conflict resolution. How do we encourage talks in the Middle East?
Yeah, and I think it's a very good way to frame the question, because talking is key, and it's not, in this case, as simple as just going straight to talking. We need to create the circumstances where dialogue is possible. And if we take the 7th of October, every person that I've heard right across the world has rightfully condemned what was a deliberate targeting and killing and hostage taking of civilians within Israel. What we have seen in response since October 7th. And so I must say that's also a breach of international law, what happened on October the 7th. What we have seen every single day since October 7th is a breach of international law by the Israelis. And of course, virtually every single day prior to October 7th, the Israeli government have breached international law. They have occupied Palestinian land in contravention of international law. They have blockaded Palestinian territory in contravention of international law. They have built and enlarged settlements in contravention of international law, enforced an apartheid system that strips Palestinians of the most basic civic and human rights, not to mention natural dignity. And they have also targeted and killed and injured civilians on a mass scale for decades. And the response of the Western world at this time is what? Israel has a right to defend itself. Well, what exactly does that mean? Because the way that that's been interpreted, the way Israel takes that to mean, is that they can cut off food, that they can cut off the power, that they can cut off water, that they can enforce the displacement of over 1 million citizens in what has been described by NGOs and United Nations reps on the ground as an open-air prison.
So what do you think it should mean?
Well, what I think
and when Israel talks about wanting to destroy Hamas, do you agree with that?
What I think, to answer the question, I was struck yesterday by an open letter that was signed, amongst others, by the former President of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, Lord Newberger. The letter was signed off by those who identified themselves as Jewish and as lawyers. And what they cautioned against was international law being flouted once again. What they said was that the right to defend yourself is defined within the confines of international law. And where Israel is grieving, where Israel is hurt, there is an even bigger onus on self-identifying friends of Israel, like the British government, like the American government and other Western governments, to be critical friends and to say that there comes a time when cutting off power, cutting off food, cutting off all of the basics that people need.
OK, but let me just ask you again, because one of Israel's stated...
Hang on, one of Israel's stated...
It is, but let me just ask you, didn't answer my question. No, John, you didn't answer my question.
Let me finish and then we'll come back.
No, I want you to answer this question. No, John, I want you to answer this question. One of Israel's stated aims is to destroy Hamas. Do you agree with that?
The stated aim of Israel may well be that they say to destroy Hamas.
Yeah, I'm asking if you agree with that.
I will answer the question. What I have witnessed, not to mention over the past decades, but let's take the last 10 days, what I have witnessed is a defenceless people getting pummeled from the air by one of the most sophisticated and powerful militaries on this planet.
And you've made that point very powerfully.
By also one of the most powerful militaries in this world. And what we need is the introduction of language that there needs to be dialogue, because none of this that is happening...
So do you agree with that aim or not? Do you agree with the Israeli... I mean, I'll give up in a minute because you're not answering the question. But do you agree with the Israel's aim to destroy Hamas?
I don't think anybody believes that what Israel is doing is going to destroy Hamas, let alone embed the safety within that region.
But do you think they're right to try or not?
The wider world. Well, you can say that. I mean, how many civilians are we allowed to watch die?
No. Listen, I'm not saying whether it's right or I'm just asking whether you agree with their aim.
Israel will have an aim and an objective that it is defined by their.
Am I getting an answer?
Terms.
No, John. I don't think I'm getting it. Okay.
The point is that international law and human rights standards cannot be thrown out the window.
Okay, and you've made that point very strongly and very eloquently. I hear you, Jeffrey.
Well, look, we've all witnessed the horrific scenes that have been played out. Let me be absolutely clear. The unprovoked terrorist attack on Israel was wrong. Like Hillary, I've stood in the town of Sderot. I've visited the homes of ordinary Israelis. I've met people in the West Bank. I've met Palestinians. I've been out there a number of times and talked to people. And I agree that the ordinary people want peace. But can I just say, this notion, that Israel is an apartheid state, that it doesn't work, and that we hold Israel up on the one hand, and then we talk about the Palestinian side. Let's get a sense of perspective. Israel is a democracy. The people who live in Israel can vote, including the Israeli Arabs. In Gaza, it is entirely different. Hamas rules Gaza with an iron fist. They eradicated Fatah, took them out in Gaza. And as for their human rights record, it is absolutely appalling. And so to attack Israel in the way that John has with respect, I think is wrong. There is no defence, none whatsoever, for that attack that occurred on the 7th of October, the murder of innocent people. Now, and as the Secretary of State has said, it is terrorism through and through. Now, what do we do? The question is a good question. And Northern Ireland was seen for many years as a seemingly intractable conflict, that there was no way to resolve our conflict, that we were just going to be locked in forever into division and the violence that flowed from that division. And I think there has been a failing, not just on the part of, and Hilary is right to call out leadership, but a failing too on the part of the international community. We benefited in Northern Ireland from the support of the international community in bringing people together, facilitating dialogue. And I've seen an absence of that in recent years. The situation has been allowed to drift. And the result and the consequences of no dialogue is that other people step in. And they step in and take it into their own hands. And they are wrong. The idea that Hamas murdering innocent Israelis is in any way or shape in the interests of the Palestinian people. Thousands of Palestinians may well die in this war. And they will die because they've been put in harm's way by their so-called overlord Hamas.
And Geoffrey, to John's point about the siege of Gaza, about the cutting off of water, of electricity, of not allowing food in.
Well, I would prefer, on a humanitarian basis, that people in Gaza have access to food, have access to water, have access to the basic amenities that they need. But the difficulty is when Hamas use people as human shields, when they fire their rockets from the schoolyards, from the car parks of hospitals, when they engage in that kind of activity, it is very, very difficult. It makes for a very messy war situation in which lots of innocent people, sadly, on both sides lose their lives. And that is unacceptable. But if we're going to make a change here, because every war and conflict has a beginning and an end, and then the question is, what then? What comes after that? And I think the international community has got to step in here. The instability in the Middle East has consequences for all of us, and therefore it is vital that a process of dialogue is found. The first point that must be taken is the same as in Northern Ireland. Those who see violence as a way to resolve division are wrong. They must lay down their arms, call a ceasefire, come to the table and start talking and sort it out.
What I don't want to do tonight is have a situation where we make this about ourselves in Northern Ireland, and I think it's really important to say that. I also think it's really important that we talk about the people and the families in the Middle East, in Israel, in Palestine. And I watched babies being put into incubators in a hospital because they were premature and told where to go. There's nowhere for them to go. We watched young people at a music festival being mown down in the most barbaric way. And I think people have discussed this well enough. The only thing I would like to add is that, and Geoffrey mentioned this to be fair, there is an early day motion in the House at the minute. We have put our name to that motion, and that sets out that we must have a ceasefire. It is a decision to carry on with attrition, and that's what people have set out tonight. It becomes a war of attrition. Not one life is worth violence, and we need to prioritise the humanitarian needs. We need to have a humanitarian corridor opened up. We need to have that ceasefire. And yes, we do, as everyone has said, need to have the international community come and put their arm round. But what I think is also important to say is that it isn't mutually exclusive, as somebody else had said earlier. It isn't mutually exclusive to call out the absolutely horrific actions of Hamas, but at the same time, challenge Israel where they have acted wrong, and certainly condemn where we feel that they have breached international humanitarian law, as set out clearly in statute and legislation through the Geneva Convention and other things. And you can see already tonight in the room, it's ratcheted up a little, the tempo has increased, and we don't want that.
Can I ask you about the ceasefire, because a number of Labour MPs have put their name to that as well. How are you envisaging that working? Are you talking about a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas? Can you see Hamas taking part in that?
Well, how
do you see it working?
As others have set out, this is very unclear in terms of even real-time information coming out.
But when the fact you put your name, here representing the Alliance Party, of course, to a motion calling for a ceasefire between who?
So we would see that being facilitated by the UN. We think they're the only people at this stage in the game that can actually step in and facilitate a dialogue. Everyone has agreed that there should be no more killing. Everyone has agreed that there should be a dialogue. And with respect, that is a choice for people to carry on without having that international community coming round. Everyone has said they want the bloodshed to end. That can only end when people set down weapons. That can only end whenever people step in from the international community.
But Hamas haven't said that. Hamas want to eradicate Israel from the map.
Hamas are a terrorist organisation. Yeah. We've all agreed on that.
How can Israel talk to Hamas in this
And it's not a matter of making this about things that people may or may not agree and disagree on. It's about people are dying. People are dying. Hospitals are being bombed. Young people were mown down in their prime by terrorists at a music festival. None of this conversation is bringing peace. And that's so desperately what's needed in the Middle East.
You want to jump in quickly and I want to come to you.
Everybody wants the killing to end, but we have to put our effort where it's going to make a difference. And Hamas is continuing to attack Israel. And is Israel meant to sit there while the rockets continue to come over? Is Israel meant to sit there and not try and rescue their hostages? And I don't think it would make a difference at the moment. There will eventually be a ceasefire because that's how all the conflicts in Gaza have eventually ended, when the fighting is finished and people are exhausted. The place to put our effort is to get the humanitarian aid in. Now, President Biden went yesterday and persuaded Israel to open the Rafah crossing, although when I checked earlier,
no lorries have yet gone in.
And 20 lorries is nothing. We need a much bigger pipeline of humanitarian aid, food, fuel. Fuel's important because the generators in the hospitals in Gaza need fuel to run the electricity, to do the operations, to keep the babies alive in the incubators. And that is where we should focus our effort.
I think we're proud that we have signed that because it shows people in our community who are hurting, who genuinely care. And Chris mentioned the Jewish community in Northern Ireland, people who are from Palestine living in Northern Ireland, and they need to feel safe here. And that's really important, not just in Northern Ireland, right across the UK. And we're proud that we have put our name to calling for peace and humanitarian support.
Well, let's hear from some of the people in our audience, shall we? Yes, the man there, a bit further over in the blue top with the white stripes on your collar. Yes.
Fiona, it came as no surprise to me whatsoever there that John Vidukan deliberately dodged your question. He clearly supports a terrorist organisation in Hamas. Him and the rest of his cronies in the Sinn Féin are in bed with another terrorist organisation, be it the IRA. The two similarities...
Listen, I must let... That's a very serious allegation, and I must let John
everybody over
that.
Here knows it. Sadly, through the week, Hamas bombed a hospital. Another similarity, that the IRA did exactly the same thing.
Hang on, are you talking about the Al-Akhli hospital? Mm-hmm. It is not clear who targeted
there's a high
that hospital
possibility that is true. The same things the IRA did here a number of years ago, bombed the Mater Hospital, the military wing, and killed 2 people. A disgrace. And that's the type of terrorist organisation him and his party are supporting.
John, of course I must let you answer that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's completely untrue, and I think it's what we're seeing is an opportunity to take the suffering of thousands and thousands of people in the Middle East to make what I would describe as a fairly cheap political point in what is a very serious conversation. You've made an accusation against me, and that's fine. You have your own view, and I'm not going to patronise you to change it. But I'm somebody who grew up during a conflict. I'm somebody who had the conflict visited upon me very personally. As a result of the murder of my father. The very first time that I voted in my life, I've said this before, was for the Good Friday Agreement. And I'm very grateful that I was given that opportunity by people on all sides who recognised the potential of dialogue, who recognised and created the conditions for peace that ultimately led to the Good Friday Agreement that I was very proud to vote for the very first time that I voted. So I've benefited from peace. I've benefited from people who have not went out of their way to poke political opponents in their eye. And I'm reminded of the words of Martin McGuinness, who said that you don't make peace with your friends. And peace processes, by their very nature and definition, are difficult. They cause a lot of upset and difficult decisions to be made, but they are necessary for those who are serious about peace. So to clarify what I said in my earlier answer, is that there will be very difficult decisions that require to be taken by all sides in the Middle East at the minute, all sides who have both inflicted and suffered hurt. But it's not good enough, and I've sort of heard a little bit of mixed messaging from some of the answers so far tonight, that one, there's an absence of leadership in the Western world, but two, Israel has a right to defend itself. The way Israel is interpreting that, what is it? Because I think if we are to see leadership in the Western world, we are going to have to see the conditions for every armed group that is on the ground over there at the minute to be convinced and brought to the place where an immediate ceasefire is put in place, where all hostages are given back without a single second of delay, and the conditions are created where they can possibly aspire to what we have benefited from here.
Okay. I am going to move on, if you'll forgive me, those who've got your hands up, because as many of you asked about the Middle East, also asked about this next question. So